Anyways, we're here. It is the end of March, so we are going to be diving in as this fiscal year comes to a close. We are here to talk about video games, particularly the death of one aspect of video games. Cameron, this week announced from Sony, they announced that the PlayStation 3 store, the PlayStation Vita store, and the PSP stores are all getting shut down. They're done.
Now, has this been officially announced yet? Or I've seen the reports from the Gamer. I didn't see anything official from Sony yet.
Sorry. Well, thank you for correcting me on that. So yes, reportedly, reports are saying that that the stores are going to be shut down, and I think it makes sense. We're at that point now. PS5 is out, but Cameron, I'm curious. You are our go-to Sony our boots on the ground Sony correspondent here, right?
Remember when boots on the ground was like taboo for like people? Oh, they're saying it too much. I think it was a Call of Duty thing.
Well, yeah, we're saying it right now. We're saying it right now. Boots on the ground, Sony correspondent. Where he goes, Sony news follows. Mr. Cameron Kearns, I'd like to hear your thoughts. The idea of such a large portion of PlayStation history kind of like basically just being like, we're going to flip it off. How are you thinking about that? How do you feel about that? I'm very curious of your thoughts on this.
Man, it's a mixed bag. I'm of the same thing. You know, I've still got my PSP, a PS Vita, and I don't have a PS3 here in the house, but I've got the handhelds right behind me on my shelf, and I never use those things. I would dare say, I mean, the PSP and the PlayStation 3 probably for sure. I don't think anybody's playing those, or I'm more apt to say that there are not many people playing those. Let's be real on that. The PS Vita, you might have a slightly larger bump, but I mean, honestly, with the Switches here, unless you're a super diehard Vita fan, you're playing on a Switch or a Nintendo handheld. Let's be honest, being 100% honest. And so those stores closing aren't really. I think from a business standpoint, it makes sense. Why are you gonna keep continuing to host that on your servers when you could take those offline and repurpose those for PS4 or PS5 or PS Now stuff where people are actively using your services there. But on the other side too, and it's going to be the thing we talk about in this topic here, is just a lot of the times those games you're not going to be able to play them anymore unless you have them physically and you're sitting with them and your little what the hell, the UMDs on your PSP, or it's on your memory card on your Vita. You got the little Vita cards or whatnot. You're not going to be able to play some of these games just simply because the newer hardware doesn't support backwards compatibility, or you don't have you just don't have the hardware itself, and you never got the game physically, and so that's kind of that's where the rub comes in. If you're with me there, is that it's losing that part of history kind of sucks, and not being, you can't go back. You can't go to your kids. When you get older, you can't go to your kids and say, "Hey, let me dust off this PlayStation 3 system, big chunkus here, and let me show you how games used to be back in the early 2000s or late 2000s when I was playing them." So that's the rub. And that's, you want me to introduce the topic, or do you want to go?
Go ahead. You listen, man. You're on a roll. You got a combo going. I'm not going to hit you with a combo breaker.
Okay.
So let's
jump into this topic here, guys. Topic number one is really about preserving video game history, and I wanted us to talk about this in light of this news with PlayStation 3 and the stores being permanently closed from this report. Because we've talked about it a little bit, Seth, but we really haven't dived into it a lot. Video games are getting older. For people, for all the youngins out there, sometimes we don't think, actually want to, hold on, we don't think that gaming is older than it actually is. And I want to bring up a quick clip that I brought up. So I was reading this online, and this is another reason why it got me thinking. Seth, if you've seen this, I was
Yep.
like, oh God, I'm an old man. Because I remember getting the Final Fantasy X when it first came out on PlayStation 2. I was like, oh my God, Final Fantasy X, yay, I'm super excited. And that was 20 years ago.
Yep.
I was a teenager.
The other fun fact, let me just go ahead and hit you with real facts here. So the other day, we passed a threshold where the distance of time, or the amount of time that has passed since the Xbox 360 launched, was greater than the amount of time that had passed between when the SNES launched and the 360 launched. So basically, when you think about the 360 coming out, you're like, oh, that wasn't that too far back, right? No, more time has passed between now and the 360 launch than had passed when the 360 launched versus the SNES launch.
God, that's...
So just, yeah, time is a round circle. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that we are in this stage that games are evolving, and their evolutionary pace is I would say quadrupling, octupling. It is astonishing to see what COVID and the pandemic and everything has done for gaming in particular.
Yeah.
A lot of people who study the progress, like the I guess the technological progression or the progress of products and lifestyles and whatnot, you look at it in like years of advancement, right? So you're like, well, what do you mean? What does that mean, Seth? Like 1 year of advancement is 1 year of time? Not necessarily. So, for example, the pandemic, which has taken place about a year, right? It's going to probably end up being about a year and a half, has ended up pushing a lot of industries to 3 to 5 years of progress in a very short amount of time. Look where streaming was, and I'm talking about streaming of video content. Look at where that was February of 2020. It was not, we were not talking about big Disney movies coming to that at launch, right? We were not talking about all these different services. So that's kind of the shtick here. But then what loops back around here is now we're also starting to feel growing pains of, I would say, Cameron, that the PS3 was the first console that Sony ever had where there was a convincing appeal to buying digital games, right? Like there was no PSN on PS2. There was no...
Yeah, it was the 360 PlayStation 3 genre.
That's when PSN came out. That's when you could start buying things. So yeah, this is basically like the first fall off of a digital storefront, an entire storefront.
And
right?
yeah, and I wanted to I want us to take some time here to just talk about, especially with physical and digital, about preserving video game history. And, now that video games are over 50 plus years, this is a topic that I feel like in the last couple of years we've started talking about, or some people have started talking about, and really, maybe we can add to the conversation, Seth. Like, what are some ideas we can think of to help preserve how far gaming has come since the 70s? There are car museums, there are war museums. I think there is one gaming museum. Should more effort be put into that, as well as kind of talk about what a big question, and I think that's one of the reasons why I feel it's been so stagnant and slow with video games, is who should be responsible for preserving video game history, or should it be up to the developers? Should it be up to the studio holders like Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo? Or should it be a third party? Who should it be? And then also maybe have a little fun with this. And what are some things we can remember that this current generation of gamers may not know about or have an idea on? Just like things that we remember growing up, Seth, that gamers have been like, what? I've never heard or seen of that before. So we're on this train track. We're on this conversation, Seth. What do you think, man?
I want to dive in specifically to the question of like who should be responsible for preserving game history. And I think that's a tricky question, because I don't think anyone should be responsible for gaming history. Gaming is not the first thing to come across things getting too old. Heck, books. You know, there are lost, forgotten books. Uh, there are lost, forgotten movies, lost, forgotten television shows. So games are just kind of reaching that age now where like things are just falling off, right? Like, and so I don't think anyone should be responsible for it. Like, because then there's this expectation of, well, you've got to do it. And if you're going to do it, it's going to be a business, right? Someone's going to run it as a business. They're going to try and charge you for it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas where I think when people who love something do something they love, right? That's when you get the best kind of interaction. And I think when you, I hate to say this, but who is not should, but who is going to do this? I think that the mainstream media industry likes to call them pirates. I would probably look at them more as like, you know, conservative, hardcore gamers. The people that love these games are going to find ways to make it work. It's people who run Phantasy Star Online servers, in their home. People who run Xbox Live, Halo 1 servers in their home back before CE and the Master Chief Collection came out. That was a thing. And so people like, to quote the great Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way, right? And the gamers in particular are very passionate about what they do, and they really want to hang on to that feeling that they had. Well, there's no better way to relive that feeling than to relive the product, right?
Yeah.
So if a publisher is going to look at a game catalog, and if they see demand for something that they can sell, I'll just use Diablo 2 as an example, right? Like Diablo 2 is getting remastered. I love that game. I can't wait to play that game. They're putting it back out because that game was successful and people want that. However, you're not going to see, a remaster of 50 Cent Blood on the Sand, right? Like that's not a game that people are like clamoring for, right? And so I think what's weird now is that we're just at this point where you could be listening to a podcast like this and you're like, man, I want to play 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. But we've just kind of crossed this threshold of like, now it's going to be kind of hard to do that, right? Because once you shut down the digital store, all the prices for the physical products are going to go up, right? Then you carve off a piece of the pie. Some collectors are going to basically vault their stuff. Well, they're not ever going to consider getting rid of it, right?
Because I'm kind of jumping on your point as well. Like, think about Nintendo games, especially. I know one game series that is almost notorious, it feels like, for it are the Xenoblade games and the Xenosaga games. Like, dude, like on Nintendo systems, isn't like the one that was on Wii before it got remastered. Like people, that was like full on $80 plus if you could find it.
Yep.
People were trying to get that game. It was wild.
So, and I think that there's another side to this argument that this discussion that I really don't think we're going to talk about today, but like, it really also depends on when you make a decision like this, people start to look at like your past behavior and they say like, well, did you do enough to make sure this was supported, right? And I think that when you look at, Sony's business is not about selling old games, right? Like their business is selling you new games. And so I think they're a little bit more willing to let go of this kind of stuff, right? But at this point, I will be honest, it has been over 7-8 years since the thing, was basically tapped out. So I don't think it's a bad idea for them to stop selling the games. Now, what I don't want to happen is for some of these games to disappear. So I really do hope that enthusiast community, because I know it's out there, I hope that they start doing the work. And let's be real, it just needs to be like the PS3 should be a core on Mister. Sorry, that I lost it for a second. Which we haven't really talked a whole lot about Mister on here, but it is like an emulation, open source emulation wrapper, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you plug different cores into it that enable it to play different types of games, right? So you plug in like an NES core and it can load up NES ROMs. None of these words make sense. I'm very sorry. I am getting a little technical, but I would, it just needs, at this point, open source community should embrace it and do their best to preserve what they can. Some things are going to fall off, but I think that enthusiast community is very good at figuring this stuff out. They've done it for years. They'll do it for years more.
And I like the enthusiast community. I think there's always going to be an enthusiast community to help out with this. But my thoughts, I don't think it should just be the enthusiast community. I mean, we have people that archive, the national, what's it called? Congress, the National Congress thing.
Library of Congress.
The Library of Congress
Yes.
holds all this information in, and they have like film and TV that gets put in there. I don't know if they do video games. Seth, you might be able to check that for.
They do.
They do video games. Okay,
They've got
so
some
that
stuff.
makes me feel good too. And I know that for people who don't know, there is a National Video Game Museum that is out in Frisco, Texas. Damn it, I was over there. I could have gone, but like, to what extent? I feel like, in regards and things we've always talked about in other topics, is that I feel like video games are different because they're interactive. It's one thing to archive film and TV and stuff that you can just watch, and you tune in and whatever. But then, like, there are these games and other things that they're interactive. Like, you have to touch them and experience and be able to play. Like, to show somebody 10 years in the future how gaming was when we were kids, because we really are some of the first generation of people who have had games our entire life and have lived and breathed it. And it continues to evolve. And I would like to see some support being put in. I would probably say from a third party, whether it is like a group, a bunch of important people, like Jeff Keighley says, it's time to do this, and gets some money and gets a group of people to start doing this and create something just like how the ESRB was created, or something where like the the enthusiasts, what we were just talking about, like getting the enthusiasts getting together and saying, you know what, let's work together and try and see what we can do to actively push this. Because I know that, like, it's just not saying that enthusiasts wouldn't validate it, but something to kind of have that stamp of approval. We have that kind of official seal on movies and film. Let's have that on video games too.
Yeah. It just gets really problematic with games because of the way publishers look at, let's just say what it is, like the way that publishers look at things like piracy and the copying of that content, right? Like, yes, you're no longer able to buy a game digitally. In theory, you can buy it physically in an aftermarket situation, but if the publisher allows you, a lot of people don't understand this about the way copyright works, but if you know that someone is reselling your work and you do nothing about it, that is grounds for anyone to resell your work because you've given them an expressed permission. That's part of our copyright law. It's really stupid, but that's the way it works. And that's why you see Nintendo like go after these esports organizations that are using like hacked versions of their games, right? Because if they know about its existence and they ignore it, then when someone else, like if someone were to try and sell, let's say, for example, Diablo 2, right? Like, let's say some dude's running a server in his house. About 500 people are playing this Diablo 2 server run out of this guy's house. Well, someone from Blizzard sends an email internally that's like, hey, there's this guy running a server on his, computer. Do we need to shut him down? It goes up the legal ladder. They say, nah, he's only got 500 people. We're not going to worry about it. And then another person is like, oh, I'm going to actually spin up a bunch of AWS servers and like sell this as a game. And he ends up selling 10,000 copies and Blizzard wants to go after him. Well, if that email comes out, they will basically lose that case because they're like, well, you didn't care about it when there were only 500 people. You can't care about it when it blows up, right? And so that's where it gets like the ESRB is there to protect everybody. I don't know that publishers would look at a body that like basically steals their work as a protection agency, right?
That's the other sticky situation with video games, is because certain scenarios, like if you have a game that has a licensed soundtrack and you put that in taking the example, we put it in a museum. When people interacted with that, does that mean that the museum has to pay like a portion of their funds that they get from the people that come see their exhibits to the license holders that hold those songs and the music or that content. Just because it's in a museum and it just happens to be licensed content that they're interacting with. What about games that are multiplayer focused? Or multiplayer dependent that required servers and things like that you put them in the library or in the museum, and they don't have a way of, there's not really a way of accessing or using those. Does that mean somebody has to pay to put up a small server, so that when people come into the exhibit, they interact with those? I feel like that stuff can be ironed out, and I feel like we're overthinking it a little bit. I don't think people are going to be that hard of an ass on that stuff, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah.
And my thinking on preserving the history is having something where saying, like, when a game is about to go away, taking like a digital copy of that and putting it in an archive, like having just a big Indiana Jones style warehouse where you just roll the cart down and, like, boom, lock this digital version up on a hard drive or something to where it's preserved there, or also having like a handful of physical copies of that game to where it, have it in a museum, to where that way you just really have one on demo at a time, so that if people want to try and play it, or really if you just want to showcase the box or whatnot, because it's a museum for the most part, you're looking at a lot of stuff, but I know that there's interactivity. There are kids now, there are kids born in this world who have never seen or heard of the word Dreamcast. And that's a shame, because the Dreamcast was awesome, number one. But number two, it should, who's to say that a kid could go to the video game museum, see the Dreamcast, read up on its history, and maybe get inspired or good ideas about something like that. And maybe grow up to be a game developer and code their own games. And it's I'm saying, I feel like I'm saying random stuff there, but like part of that video game history is not only just like showcasing where we came from, but also learning from the past, learning from the mistakes that developers made early on, when they were, honestly, we were limited by resources and oh shit. Scared the God. Man, I love that.
You need to change your raid notification, because Jack Wolf Hart just raided with 4 people, and you almost shut down. I think you took 4 years of life off of Cameron's heart.
Oh God, thank you for the raid, guys. Oh sweet Jesus, I'm scared the hell out of me. Yeah, but continuing my point, like, we learning from the past and really understanding, back in the Super NES days, developers were limited by resources. We've heard all the little different stories about how developers had to get creative with, how the game played, just based on the fact that they didn't have enough memory to put in the box. But now we're in a world where, for lack of a better explanation, we are not burdened by that anymore. The drives have terabytes of data. There are 16, 32, 64 plus gigabytes of RAM in some computers. Plenty of resources for modern developers to create those games. But, it is a topic we'll have to get into at some point in time. But, like, I also remember those limitations had to make developers get creative and figure things out. And we saw some of that creativity. Whereas now, we're not saying that people aren't creative nowadays, but the more that hardware gives us more flexibility to make bigger and better games. But now you don't have to worry about, like, oh, I don't need to do this memory trick to save some memory space so the game doesn't crash. And some of the maybe ideas or thoughts that came into that. And I think that for me, that's the big thing, is I want to see us preserving the video game history so that we can teach the future how it used to be. And of course, these are the young kids. They're going to be like, get out of here, Grandpa. We have 8K gaming and 128 gigabytes of RAM, and nano drives that activate in milliseconds or whatever. But I think there's still something to learn from that. And not even just like from a technological standpoint, but to also explain to people why are there so many people our age that love Super Mario so much. When you talk about Super Mario Brothers and Mario in general back in the day, when the PlayStation landed, when the Xbox landed, why people are so in love with Halo, and kind of that world and the state that it was in. When, maybe there are some Halo fans that don't really realize that Halo was people weren't hyping Halo up when the Xbox was launching like they are now. And people weren't why people, younger kids now, they're like, oh, Sega just makes games. Sega used to make consoles. And like they were the main competitor to Nintendo back in the day. And all this other stories that I feel the internet helps. Mm-hmm. The internet provides that, because it's the internet, you can always have access to that information. But just like and this isn't a full one-on-one comparison, but like just like we like going to Washington D.C. and look at all the different museums on the history of the world and current events and things like that. People go to like wax museums to learn about film and history and stuff like that. Why can't we have something like that for video games? Is all I'm saying. And put more effort into it. I said we have a video game museum, but like actually have a concerted effort where we as an industry can drop the facades, pull down the thing of like, I'm Nintendo guy and you're a Sony guy and you're an Xbox guy. I'm like, yeah, and say like, this is for preservation of video game history, so that when 100 years down the road, when we're long and gone, people can look back and like, oh, in the 1970s, why was Pong such a big hit, and why was Super Mario Brothers such a big deal, and like, man, I wish I could play that game or maybe experience it or see it or something like that, and maybe not have to rely on the internet to do so.
Yeah, I'm gonna share a controversial opinion. I suspect this to be a little controversial, but when I look at trying to convince a company to preserve stuff, it's a really hard sell, because their first question is going to be like, well, how do we make money off of that, right? And my thought here is that this is why looking at products like PlayStation Now, Xbox Game Pass, and Nintendo Network Online, those really are things that I know people love to roll their eyes at subscription services. They hate the idea of like recurring billing. But that incentivizes the companies involved to keep those games preserved, right? PlayStation Now is this huge cloud-based gaming platform that has tons of these PS3 games available to play right on it. Now, they do stream, so they're like not a downloaded local copy, but you can still have access to those games, right? Game Pass, I'm not even going to begin to tell you all the things that Microsoft has done for back compat, right? Like, mm-hmm. You can play Morrowind right now on your Xbox Series X, like insanity. And then Nintendo, I don't think Nintendo gets a lot of credit for what they do with the Nintendo Online stuff. They've got a lot of really great NES and SNES games available on that. And I do suspect that Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games will eventually come to that as well. They just, Nintendo's a little slower. They're a little, they take a little bit of time to really get warmed up to the idea.
Well, they also very much, no offense to Nintendo, but they're kind of one of the prime examples of how can we make money off this.
And like, it's not a bad thing for companies to want to make money off their IP if it incentivizes them to keep these games alive. Now, if the thing you're asking me is like, well, I want to be able to keep Heavenly Sword alive, but I don't have to pay to do that. Well, then that's not really something that like a company's not going to put resources into doing that for you. Well, the enthusiast community probably will. But
yeah, and I don't. I'm not saying necessarily like keep it alive in the sense of like we're gonna keep it on the store, and now it's free, and everybody can play and experience it. Maybe that's something that can be worked out. Like, I would much more rather see, like, okay, we're gonna take Heavenly Sword. It's off the stores. If you want to see Heavenly Sword now or learn more about it, you have to go to the National Video Game Museum in Texas. And there's.
I think that happens, Cameron. It's just not a structured organization like you want. Because if it was a structured organization, it would be a target that publishers would like. I'm talking piranha devour, right? Like, but like, I'm sure if you go to retro forums or certain subreddits, I am sure that the community is there. I have my friends on Discord. I have about 3 friends where every time I log into Discord, they are playing. I see them playing Dolphin, which is an emulation software, right? And so it's out there. You just can't acknowledge it, because if you acknowledge it, then it becomes a target, right? So I think right now we're in the best situation we can hope for, right? Like, I think Xbox is doing a lot of work on Game Pass, and I hope that competitors look at that and see like, oh, it is really important that we keep, especially big games, alive, right? A great example of one that I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine like this game not being playable, but Metal Gear Solid 4. The end of that series is only available to play on PlayStation 3. So whenever this inevitably happens and you play Metal Gear and you want to see how that story concludes, I suspect copies of that to like skyrocket, because it really is the conclusion of one of the most popular game franchises of that era.
You made me think about microwaves. So
yeah. If to learn more, go ahead and buy Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriot while you still can. But